Rowena Clark had one foot on the fourth rung of the library ladder and two fingers hooked round the spine of a folio atlas when the great doors banged open beneath her, and the Duke of Ravensmere informed his butler that he would sooner be flayed than marry her. Marry her? Never. The words came up through the floorboards and the ladder both, hard as a slammed lid. Not if the alternative were a debtor's cell, Pruitt. Not if my grandmother wept for a full 12-month and the west roof came down on both our heads. 20 feet below her, the Duke crossed the turkey carpet in 4 strides that set the crystal drops of the lamp trembling on their wires. Rowena froze against the shelves. The atlas was heavier than she had judged, and the dust of a decade lay along its top edge, in a soft grey pelt. She could taste it, dry and faintly sweet, at the back of her throat. Beyond the tall south windows, the July heat pressed white against the glass, and a single wasp knocked itself stupid against a pane. Over and over, tick, 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 as your Grace says. Pruitt's voice was the colour of old walnut, unhurried. Shall I convey that to her Grace verbatim, or should you prefer I soften the parts about the flaying? Convey nothing. She will only sharpen her aim. The Duke stopped directly beneath the ladder. From above, Rowena had a fine view of a pair of broad shoulders that strained the seams of a bottle-green riding coat, of dark hair still damp at the nape from the morning's heat, of one gloveless hand that came down flat upon the reading table and squared a scatter of correspondence into a single tidy stack, corner to corner, as though order in paper might impose it elsewhere. She has taken a companion, Pruitt, a penniless nobody with a clever tongue, and no people to speak of, and she parades the creature past me at every meal as if I were a horse being shown a mare. Miss Clark this, Miss Clark that. Miss Clark has such opinions on drainage. Miss Clark does, Your Grace. I am aware. He said it the way a man says he is aware of a stone in his boot. Rowena discovered, in that moment, 2 things. The first was that her right foot had gone entirely to sleep. The second was that she had, with the particular genius that had governed the whole of her 26 years, left the little brass brake of the ladder unset. She shifted her numb foot half an inch to relieve it. The casters woke with a squeal of complaint, and the ladder rolled the length of its brass rail in one long, unhurried, mortifying glide, bearing her out of the shadowed alcove and into the full glare of the south windows, where the light caught her the way it might catch a portrait unveiled at exactly the wrong hour. The Duke's head came up. She looked down. For a heartbeat, neither of them said anything at all, and the wasp went on knocking at the glass, and the dust she had disturbed sifted down between them in a slow gold column. You have excellent lungs, Your Grace, Rowena said. One heard every word of it, quite clearly, from Cornwall. The colour that climbed his throat was worth, she thought, the whole wretched summer. He was younger than his manner, not above 28, with a jaw that had plainly been set against the world since he was a boy and grey eyes that had gone perfectly, splendidly flat with horror. Miss Clark. Your Grace. She descended the ladder 1 rung at a time, the atlas clasped to her chest like a shield, her slippers finding each step with more dignity than she felt. The leather rail was warm under her palm. Pray do not distress yourself on my account. A mare, I believe, was the term. I have been called worse by better men, though I confess the drainage remark stung. My opinions on drainage are excellent. Pruitt, by the door, developed a sudden and consuming interest in the ceiling. The Duke recovered himself with the speed of a man who had spent years recovering himself. His spine drew up. His hand left the papers. You were eavesdropping. I was fetching an atlas. She set it on the table between them with a soft leathery thud that raised a fresh breath of dust. Your grandmother wishes to trace the course of the Ravensbourne before it was straightened. It is a very old estate, and a very high shelf, and you have a very carrying voice. I should think half the county knows your feelings on the subject of matrimony by now, and the other half will hear them at church on Sunday. That is precisely the difficulty, he said, before he could stop himself. There, that was the crack in him, and she heard it. Not temper, but something harried and cornered underneath the temper. A man in a snare pretending the snare was beneath his notice. Rowena filed it away with the tidy, mercenary care of a woman who had learned young that observation was the only inheritance no one could take from her. "Then, we are agreed," she said pleasantly. "You have no wish to marry me. I have no wish whatever to marry you. In the whole of England there has surely never been an engagement so thoroughly opposed by both its principals. I cannot think why your grandmother imagines it will answer." He looked at her then, really looked, grey eyes narrowing, as if she had turned out to be printed in a language he had assumed he could not read. "You think it is she who imagines it. I know it is she. I have watched her arrange 3 marriages this season alone, none of them her own, all of them successful, and all of them managed with the ruthlessness of a general at Salamanca." Rowena drew off the gauze half-mitts that had protected her hands from the dust and shook them out, and the fine grey powder drifted away on the hot, still air. "She rearranged the seating at dinner on Tuesday, so that I was placed at your left. On Wednesday she developed a headache the instant the tea was poured, that you and I might read to her by turns until it passed. Yesterday she pronounced my sketching a pity to waste indoors, and sent us both to the lime walk. I am a companion, your grace, not a simpleton. I know when I am being deployed." Something shifted behind his face, surprise, and beneath the surprise, faint and unwilling, the first cousin of relief. "Then you are not a party to it," he said. "I would sooner be flayed," Rowena said sweetly, giving him back his own coin. "Not if the alternative were a debtor's cell." And the Duke of Ravensmere, who had come into the library to declare that he would never in his life be moved, surprised them both by very nearly, laughing. He did not, of course. He mastered it, the way he mastered the papers and the seams of his coat and the whole ordered acreage of his life, and inclined his head a precise half-inch. "Then, we understand one another. Good day, Miss Clark." He turned for the door, and paused, and did not turn back. "The Ravensbourne is on the fold of the map before the one you have. My father marked it. You will find his hand in the margin." Then, he was gone, and the doors closed behind him with a soft, expensive click, and Rowena stood alone in the falling dust with an atlas she no longer particularly wanted to open, and the wasp finally found the gap at the top of the sash and blundered out into the blazing garden. Free, Pruitt cleared his throat. "Her Grace takes her chocolate in the Yellow Saloon at 11, Miss Clark. If I may, she does not care to be kept." "No," said Rowena. "I don't imagine she does." She opened the atlas anyway, when he had gone, and turned back one fold, and there it was, a spidery pencil line correcting the engraver's error, and beside it, in a dead man's careful hand, 3 words. Here, the river ran. She stood with her thumb resting on the ink a moment longer than she meant to. Then she closed the book, and went to be deployed. The Yellow Saloon faced east and had given up its coolness by 10:30, so that at 11 the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere sat enthroned amid a small archipelago of open windows, a Chinese fan working steadily in one beringed hand, and a cup of chocolate going cold at her elbow. She was 70 if she was a day, upright as a fire iron, dressed in dove-grey silk that had cost more than Rowena would earn in her life, and her eyes, the same flat winter grey as her grandson's, missed absolutely nothing. "You are pink," her Grace observed, before Rowena had fully crossed the threshold. "And you carry that atlas as though it had insulted you. One imagines you have met my grandson." "I have met your grandson." Rowena set the book on the Japan table and took her low chair without being asked, because the Dowager despised hovering above all other sins. The room smelled of chocolate and hot beeswax, and the faint green breath of the limes coming in through the windows on a breath of air too small to be called a breeze. He was in the library. He was of the opinion that he would sooner be flayed than marry me. He expressed it at some volume. The fan did not so much as stutter. Did he indeed? He did indeed. And I told him I felt precisely the same, which I do. So you may put away your seating charts, your grace, and your headaches, and your sudden enthusiasm for the lime walk. Rowena folded her hands in her lap and looked her employer full in the face, because she had discovered in 3 weeks that the Dowager respected nothing so much as a straight spine and a straighter tongue. "I know what you are about," I have known since Tuesday. I am not the material for a duchess, ma'am, and we both know it. And I would rather keep my post than lose it in the wreck of a scheme that cannot possibly succeed. For a long moment the only sound was the fan and the limes, and, very far off, a scythe hissing through the long grass of the south lawn. A man mowing before the heat grew murderous. Then the Dowager Duchess laughed, a dry, delighted, entirely genuine crack of laughter that took 10 years off her at a stroke. "Oh, you are exactly what I thought you were," she said. "Do you know, 3 companions in as many years, and every one of them wept the first time he was rude to her, and packed her boxes by Michaelmas. And here is Miss Rowena Clark, penniless as a church mouse, and twice as bold, telling a duchess to put away her charts." She set down the fan. "Sit up. You are already sitting up. Good, now attend to me, because I am old and I do not care to say things twice." "Your Grace, my grandson," said the Dowager, "has been alone in this great cold barn of a house for 3 years, since his father was taken from us, ordering the drains and the tenants and the accounts and his own heart into rows so straight you could plant beans by them. He does not laugh. He does not err. He rides out before the household is stirring, so that he need meet no one at breakfast, and he sits over the ledgers past midnight, so that he need not sit in an empty drawing-room, and he has convinced himself that duty and grief are the same article, which they are not, though I grant they wear a similar coat." Her voice did not shake, but her hand found the arm of her chair and gripped it. "I have perhaps 2 more summers in me, girl 3. If the physicians are wrong, which they generally are. I will not go into the ground leaving that boy walled up alive in his own good conduct. Now, you made him nearly laugh this morning. I heard of it from Pruitt before you had reached the stairs." Rowena felt the floor tilt very slightly, as it had on the ladder. "Pruitt exaggerates. Pruitt has not exaggerated a thing in 40 years. It is the great tragedy of his character." The Dowager leaned forward. "I do not require you to marry him, Miss Clark, whatever I may have let him believe. I require you to be, in this house, precisely what you were in that library. Unfrightened, unimpressed, a person who says true things into a silence, which is the one commodity a duke can never buy and no one has dared to give him since he was a boy." She sat back, "For which I will double your wage." It was a great deal of money. It was, Rowena thought, looking at the cold chocolate and the working fan and the fierce old face that had not once let her look away. Very nearly enough money to be dangerous. "And if he comes to despise me for it," she said slowly, "which he will, the moment he understands he is being managed, then you will have been despised by better men, as you told him not an hour ago." The Dowager's mouth twitched. "Yes, Pruitt, 40 years. Drink your chocolate, child. It is vile cold, but the ants are worse." Rowena did not drink the chocolate. She looked instead at the map case propped against the wall by the window, her own, brought from her father's ruined library, the last unentailed thing the creditors had let her keep, and at the roll of half-finished survey inside it, on which for 3 weeks she had been quietly and illicitly charting the true old course of the Ravensbourne with her father's brass compass, for no reason on earth but that a map half-drawn was a thing that could still be finished, and so little else in her life could. Here the river ran. She thought of the dead duke's hand in the margin, and the living duke's voice saying you will find his hand, and the small, unexpected kindness of a man giving away the thing his father had touched to a woman he had just sworn never to wed. "I will think on it," she said, which was a lie, because she had already decided, and they both knew it, and the Dowager only inclined her head exactly as her grandson had done, half an inch, no more. She saw the Duke properly for the first time 3 mornings later, and he did not see her at all. She had risen before 5, unable to sleep in the breathless heat, and carried her map case down through the sleeping house, and out across the dew-soaked lawn to finish a bearing she could only take from the old pack-horse bridge at the bottom of the park. The world at that hour was grey going to gold, the limes hung with mist, the grass soaking her hem to the knee and cold as river water against her ankles. Blackbirds were tuning up in the shrubbery. Somewhere a dog barked once and thought better of it. She had set up her compass on the parapet and bent to sight along it when she heard the hooves, a big horse, ridden hard, coming down the lime avenue at a gallop that flung divots of turf into the mist. She stepped back into the shadow of the bridge's stone abutment, without deciding to. The old instinct of a woman who had learned that the unseen keep their positions longest. It was the Duke. Of course it was the Duke. He came off the avenue and out along the water meadow at a flat run, hatless, coatless, in his shirt sleeves, with the linen plastered to his back, and there was nothing ordered about him at all. He rode the way a man drinks who is trying to drown something. At the far hedge he set the horse at a jump no sane rider takes before the light is up, and cleared it, and pulled up hard on the far side, and sat there, in the rising mist, with his head bowed, and his shoulders heaving, one broad hand flat against the animal's steaming neck, as though he were holding on to the last solid thing in a world made of fog. He stayed like that a long while, long enough that Rowena, watching from the cold shadow of the bridge with her father's compass forgotten in her hand, understood that she was seeing something she had not been meant to see. Not the Duke who squared his papers and inclined his head half an inch, but the thing that man was built to hold in. She thought of the Dowager's voice. Walled up alive in his own good conduct, she had taken it for an old woman's fondness. It looked, from here, in the grey light, like a plain report of the facts. He straightened at last. He turned the horse. And Rowena drew further back against the stone, and held her breath, and let him ride away up the avenue into the strengthening light, without ever knowing she had been there. Because some things a person is owed, and one of them is to grieve unwatched, and she found she could not spend even so useful a coin as that. She took her bearing when he had gone. Her hand was not quite steady on the compass. She told herself it was the cold. The trap sprang on the Thursday, and it sprang, as the best traps do, at dinner. There were guests by then. The house had been filling all week, carriages crunching up the gravel through the long gold evenings, until the great table seated 24, and the candles alone were a small fortune melting into the summer dusk. Rowena had been placed, as ever, at the Duke's left, and had spent the fish course discussing drainage with the squire's deaf brother, who agreed with everything she said at a volume that turned heads. The Dowager rose between the removes. She did not tap her glass. She did not need to. The table fell silent the instant she gained her feet, 24 faces turning to her like heliotropes. "My friends," she said, and her old voice carried to the corners of the room without seeming to rise at all. "You have been very patient with an old woman's whim in gathering you all here in such heat, and I shall reward your patience with the reason. On Friday, tomorrow, I mean to give a ball. The last, I shouldn't wonder, that these old walls will see me preside over." A murmur of gallant protest, which she flattened with one raised hand. "And I mean to give it," she went on, "to celebrate an understanding. A very happy one. Between my grandson," the grey eyes moved, mild as milk, to the head of the table, "and a young lady of great sense and greater spirit, who has become, this summer, entirely necessary to the peace of this house." She did not say the name. She did not have to. 24 faces turned, as one, to the Duke's left hand, where Rowena Clark sat with a forkful of turbot arrested exactly halfway to her mouth, and the whole architecture of her careful, mercenary summer collapsing silently around her ears. She set the fork down. Beside her, she felt rather than saw the Duke go rigid as a struck bell, felt the heat come off him. Saw at the edge of her vision his hand close slowly around the stem of his wineglass, until she thought the crystal must surely give. He said nothing. Neither did she. Down the long table the squire's wife had begun to applaud, and others took it up, a soft patter of gloved hands like the first of the rain, and someone called for the couple to stand. And the Dowager smiled at her grandson with the serene and total ruthlessness of a general who has moved her guns in the dark and waited for morning. To refuse now, in this room, before these people, was to make his grandmother a public spectacle, and himself a byword before the county by Sunday. To accept was to be lost. Rowena watched the knowledge of it cross his face and lock there, and she understood, with the cold clarity that had governed the whole of her 26 years, that they were both of them, now thoroughly and irretrievably caught. She rose. She did not know she meant to until she was doing it. She rose, and she smiled the bright, hard smile of a woman going over a parapet of her own accord, rather than be pushed, and she inclined her head to the applauding table, and beside her, a half-second late, the Duke of Ravensmere got to his feet as well. Because a gentleman stands when a lady does, even when the lady is the instrument of his ruin. "You will meet me," he said, very low, under the noise, his lips barely moving, his eyes fixed on the middle distance. "After the library. The moment they are at the cards." "I had rather thought I might," said Rowena, smiling at the squire's wife, "since it seems we are to be married." He found her already there when he came in, standing at the cold hearth with her arms folded, and he shut the doors behind him with rather more force than they had received that morning, and for a moment the great room was very quiet, and full of the smell of guttering candles and old leather and the night limes breathing through the open window. And the two of them looked at one another across the very carpet where all of this had begun not 4 days before. "I did not do this," he said. "I know you did not do this." She had had 2 hours to grow calm, and she had used them. "She did this. She has been doing this since Tuesday week, and tonight she spent 24 witnesses to make it a thing neither of us can undo without cost. You cannot cry off. It makes her a fool before the whole county, and you a brute. I cannot cry off. I am a paid companion who has apparently entrapped a duke, and I should not find another respectable post between here and Scotland." She unfolded her arms. "So, we are caught. The question is only what we mean to do about it, and I have a proposal, Your Grace, if you will hear it, which I flatter myself is better than either of the 2 ends of the rope she has left us." He crossed to the reading table and stood with one hand flat upon it, squaring nothing, because there was nothing there to square, and she saw the effort it cost him not to reach for the ordering of some object, any object. "Say it." "We let it stand." She watched him flinch and pressed on before he could speak. "For the summer only. We let it stand, and we are seen to be agreeable, a courtship. You are attentive. I am charming. The county is satisfied. Your grandmother is happy, which, whatever you may feel at this precise moment, you do wish. Or you would have flayed her at the table and had done." His jaw worked, but he did not deny it. "And then, when the leaves turn and the guests are gone, and there is no one left to make a spectacle of, we discover, regretfully, mutually, with the greatest civility in the world, that we do not suit. No villain, no jilt. 2 sensible people who tried and found they could not. You are free. I keep my character, and my post, and my quarter's wage, and I go quietly north to be some other old lady's clever tongue. She grieves for a fortnight and forgets us both, by Advent." Rowena lifted her chin. "You need only pretend, Your Grace, to be able to bear the sight of me. For 8 weeks, and then it is over, and you have your ordered rows, and your empty rooms, and your midnight ledgers, all to yourself again, exactly as you like them." The clock on the mantel ticked. Out in the dark, the last carriage of an early leaving guest ground away down the gravel, and was gone, and the limes stirred, and somewhere below stairs a door closed on Pruitt's 40 faithful years. The Duke looked at her for a long time. She could not read what moved behind the flat grey eyes, and she told herself it did not matter, that this was a bargain and not a betrothal, that she had struck harder ones with worse men and slept sound after. "A performance," he said at last, "with an ending already written." "With an ending already written," she agreed. "Those are the only kind I trust." He came around the table then, and held out his hand, his bare hand, the one that squared the papers, and had lain flat and grieving against a steaming horse's neck in the grey morning she would never tell him she had seen, and after a moment she took it, and his grip was warm and dry and startlingly gentle, and neither of them let go quite as quickly as the bargain required. "Friday," he said. "The ball. We begin then." "Friday," said Rowena. And she did not know, could not have known, standing there with her cold hand warming in his, and the whole reasonable ruin of her summer arranging itself into rows as neat as any he could have drawn, that the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere, passing the library door on her way up to bed, had paused in the dark of the corridor to listen, and that she was smiling. The gown the dowager sent up on Friday was the color of a poured amber cordial held to a candle, and it fit Rowena as though it had been cut to her while she slept, which, she suspected darkly, it very nearly had. She stood before the glass in the small east bedchamber, while the dowager's own maid pinned the last of her dark hair, and told her, unasked, that she looked a picture, and Rowena watched a stranger assemble herself in the mirror, a warm-skinned, straight-backed young woman with color high on her cheekbones and her father's stubborn jaw, and thought that a picture was precisely what she was to be. Framed, hung, and admired for a season, then quietly taken down and put away. "There's rouge on the tray, miss. I have quite enough color of my own tonight. Thank you, Susan." She drew on the long gloves. The kid was cool and faintly chalk-scented against her fingers, and it steadied her the way the leather rail of the ladder had steadied her 4 days before. From 2 floors below came the first tuning scrape of the hired fiddles, and under it the low sea swell murmur of 24 guests grown to 60. And under that, threaded through the whole hot night, the green breath of the limes coming in at the open casement with the moths. "Is the Duke come down?" "This half-hour, miss. Standing at the foot of the great stair, like a man at his own." The girl stopped, scarlet, like a man at his own execution. Rowena finished pleasantly. "Yes, I imagine he is. Fetch my fan, there's a dear. And stop looking as though you've buried me. It is only a ball." It was not only a ball, and she knew it, and she went down the great staircase with her chin level and her heart going like the fiddles, and the Duke of Ravensmere turned at the foot of it and looked up at her, and for one unrehearsed half-second, the flat grey eyes went entirely still. "Miss Clark." He offered his arm, in black and silver, freshly shaven, his dark hair brushed to an order that would not survive the first country dance. He looked less like a man being shown a mare, and more like the marble of himself. "You are punctual." "I am terrified," she said low, taking his arm. "It is very like punctuality from the outside. Smile, Your Grace. They are watching you already, and you have the face of a man about to read out his own sentence." His mouth did something that was not a smile, but conceded the possibility of one. "I have been practicing in the glass," he murmured, as they turned toward the blaze and roar of the ballroom doors. "I am told I achieve an expression somewhere between benediction and toothache." Rowena laughed before she could stop herself. A real laugh, startled out of her, that turned 3 nearby heads and made her press her fan to her lips too late. She looked up at him. He was watching her sidelong, and there was, in the corner of the ordered mouth, the faint, unmistakable satisfaction of a man who has aimed a thing and hit it. "That," she said, "was a joke. It was an observation. It was a joke, Your Grace. You made a joke. I shall have it engraved and hung in the long gallery, that posterity may behave," he said, and steered her through the doors into the light, and if his hand pressed a fraction closer over her gloved fingers than the performance strictly required, she decided, for the space of that entrance, not to notice it. The ballroom had been stripped and chalked and hung with 1,000 candles until the heat of it struck like an opened oven, and the whole county turned as one to see them come in. Rowena had stood at the edges of rooms like this her whole life, holding shawls and fetching negus and being spoken past. She had never once stood at the mouth of one as its centre, with the Duke's arm under her hand and 60 pairs of eyes measuring the amber silk and the straight back and finding, audibly, that it would do. She heard the whisper travel the room like wind through barley. Companion. Nobody. Clever, though. And he never so much as danced these 3 years. "They are saying I am a nobody," she told him, smiling radiantly at the squire's applauding wife. "They are saying I have not danced in 3 years," he returned, bowing to the same woman with grave precision. "Both are true. Come and make one of them a lie." He danced better than a man of such rigid daylight had any right to. He danced the way, she thought. He did everything he had decided to master, with a controlled, exact, entirely deliberate grace, counting under his breath, his hand a warm, dry certainty at the small of her back through the amber silk, turning her down the long set beneath the melting candles, while the fiddles soared and the floor thundered soft with 60 feet. Twice their eyes met, and held a beat past the figure of the dance. Twice she reminded herself, sternly, of the ending already written, and twice the reminder arrived a half-second late. "You are staring, Your Grace," she said, as the dance brought them together and the heat of him closed the last inch. "It will give the wrong impression. It will give exactly the impression my grandmother has paid 400 candles to give," he said. "Which impression is, I collect, the right one." And then, lower, under the music, so that only she could hear it, "You dance as though you have done it more often than a companion's wages permit." "My father kept a good house, once," she said, and felt the old bruise, and covered it. "Before the creditors improved our circumstances. I had 2 seasons of my own, Your Grace, a very long time ago, when I was 17 and stupid, and thought the world owed me a good end. It taught me to dance and to distrust ballrooms in roughly equal measure." "Turn me, we are being observed," he turned her. When she came back to his hand, his face had changed, some of the marble gone out of it, replaced by an attention so sudden and so total that it unsettled her more than the staring had. "You never speak of your people," he said. "There is very little to speak of. They are all of them gone north, or gone under, and I am the last of the line, and not worth the postage." She lifted her chin. "Now, you have had your quarter hour of tragic backstory, which was not in the bargain, and I will thank you to stop looking at me as though I were a map, with the interesting part torn off. People will think you have grown fond of me. And then, where should we be?" Something crossed his face at the word map. A flicker, quickly ordered away. But he inclined his head the exact half-inch, and the dance ended, and he bowed over her hand before the whole watching room with a gravity that set the squire's wife to fanning herself, and Rowena curtsied, and told herself the warmth climbing her own throat was nothing but 400 candles in the July night. She did not see the fair man watching them from the pillar by the card-room door until the dance had already delivered her, breathless, to the punch. He was. She registered first, extraordinarily handsome. Golden where the Duke was dark, slim where the Duke was broad, dressed in a dove and pearl elegance that must have cost a fortune he wore with the ease of a man who had never once paid a bill on time. He was perhaps 30. He was smiling at her as though they shared a private joke she had not yet been let into. And he came off the pillar and crossed to her through the crowd, with the boneless assurance of a cat crossing a garden it believes it owns. "Miss Clark," he said, and bowed, and the bow was a fraction too deep, a courtesy sharpened at the edge into insolence. "You will forgive me. No one has done me the office, and my cousin, I find, guards his good fortune too jealously to make the introduction himself. Julian Vane, Ravensmere's nearest kin, and, until this remarkable summer, his heir." The last word landed soft and precise as a card laid face up on green baize. Rowena kept her face perfectly still. "Mr. Vane, I had not known the Duke had a cousin." "No," said Julian Vane, and his smile widened, warm and beautiful and cold as the bottom of a well. "One does not, generally, put the family cupboard on display. May I fetch you a glass? You have the look of a woman who has just danced her way clean out of one life and into another, and that, I always find, is thirsty work." She let him fetch the glass, because refusing would have told him something, and telling a man like Julian Vane anything at all was, she already understood, a thing to be done only on purpose and at full price. He came back and stood too close and looked at her over his own wine with frank, glittering appraisal. "You are not what I expected," he said. "I confess I came expecting a milkmaid with a good ankle and a firm grip on the ledger. My cousin is nothing if not practical, and a man does not haul himself out of 3 years' mourning for a pretty face. He does it for an heir and a quiet house. And then I find—" He tipped the glass at her, a small toast, all teeth, wit, steel, a companion who reads survey charts and corrects the squire on his drainage. "It makes a man wonder, Miss Clark, what precisely my cousin thinks he is purchasing." "It makes a man wonder a great many things, Mr. Vane," she said. "I find the trick is not to say all of them aloud at a ball." He laughed, delighted, and it was a genuinely charming laugh, which was the worst thing about him. "Oh, I like you. I do. It is a great pity." He set the glass down on the tray of a passing footman without looking, the gesture of a man for whom things are always caught before they fall. "Shall I tell you what I think, since we are to be cousins? I think there is no more love in this engagement than there is water in that dry riverbed at the bottom of the park. I think my grandmother has arranged it as she arranges everything, with pins and gunpowder, and I think you, my clever penniless friend, have seen which way the wind sets and hoisted your sail. I do not even blame you. In your place I should have done the same." He leaned in, and the charm dropped clean off his face for one instant, and underneath it was something patient and hungry that made the amber silk feel suddenly thin. "But that estate has been mine in every reasonable expectation since my cousin buried his father and shut himself up to rot. And I do not intend to lose it to a summer's theatre and a lady's maid gown. Do we understand one another, Miss Clark?" Rowena looked at him for a long moment over her fan, and the fiddles soared, and the candles guttered, and 60 feet thundered soft behind them. "We understand one another perfectly, Mr. Vane," she said. "You have told me a very great deal about yourself in the space of one glass of wine, which is more than most men manage in a season, and I am obliged to you for it. You will forgive me if I do not return the courtesy. I find I am promised for the next." She was not promised for the next. She walked away from him into the crowd on legs that were not quite steady, and she did not look back, because the one thing she would not give Julian Vane was the sight of her looking back. She found the Duke on the terrace an hour later, when the dancing had thinned and the older guests had drifted to the card tables and the young ones to the dark of the shrubbery, and the night had not cooled so much as thickened, the stone of the balustrade still holding the day's heat under her palms, and the whole invisible garden below breathing out lime and stocks and cut grass into the dark. He was standing alone at the far end with his back to the lights, a glass untouched at his elbow, looking out at the black shape of the park, where somewhere a river no longer ran the way its map said it did. "Your cousin," she said, coming to stand beside him, "is a beautiful and dangerous man, and he has just told me, in so many words, that he means to see this engagement broken and himself restored to his inheritance, and that he does not care how." The Duke did not turn. "Julian is here, then. Julian is very much here. You did not think to mention him. I did not think he would come." His hand tightened on the balustrade. "He and I have not spoken above a dozen civil words since my father was taken. He came into his own portion young, and ran through it before he was 25, and he has spent the years since circling this house like a gull over a plough, waiting for me to break my neck at a hedge or drink myself into the churchyard, so that he might come into what he has always considered his by right of my inconvenience." At last he looked at her, and his face in the spill of light from the ballroom was drawn hard. "What did you tell him?" "That I was promised for the next dance, and I walked away." She watched him. "But he is not a fool, Your Grace. He looked at us across your grandmother's ballroom and he saw 2 people performing, and he named it aloud within the quarter hour. If he can see it, others will. The whole scheme depends on our being believed, and your cousin does not believe us. Then we shall have to be more convincing," the Duke said, and there was something new and grim in it. "You said as much yourself." Attentive, charming, he turned fully toward her, and the grimness cost him something. She could see it. "It is a great deal to ask, more than the bargain named. I am aware. It is." She held his eyes. "And I will do it, because I have quite as much to lose as you, and rather less to lose it with. But I will have one thing understood between us first." She took a breath of the hot lime heavy dark. "I saw you, 3 mornings ago, at the Packhorse Bridge, before the light was up. I was taking a bearing, and I heard the horse, and I stood in the shadow of the abutment. And I saw you set that great animal at the far hedge in the mist, and pull up on the other side, and grieve. I saw it, and I did not mean to, and I have told no one, and I never shall. I only say it now because you keep looking at me as though you are afraid I have seen something, and I would rather you knew what I have seen than lay awake guessing at it. There, now you know the worst of me. I am a woman who does not look away when she ought. The silence that followed was so complete, she could hear the candles hissing inside, and very far off, one late blackbird that had mistaken the ballroom's glow for dawn. The Duke had gone perfectly still. When he spoke at last, his voice had lost all its marble. "No one has said his name aloud to me in 3 years," he said. "My father's. They step around it. The whole house steps around it, as though the word itself might bring the roof down." He looked out at the dark park. "You take a bearing at 5 in the morning, in the wet, with your father's compass, on a river that is not there. Julian thinks I am buying a wife who reads charts. He has no notion at all what you are." He turned his head, and something in the grey eyes had opened that she had not been meant to see, and it frightened her far more than Vane's hunger had. "Why were you truly at that bridge, Miss Clark?" And because he had given her his father's name, she found she could not lie to him. "I am making a map," she said, "of the old course of the Ravensbourne, the true one, before they straightened it and the mill race was cut. My father was a surveyor's patron, and I was his clerk before I was anything else, and I have been charting it these 3 weeks in secret because," her voice caught, and she let it, "because a map half drawn is a thing that can still be finished, and there is so little else in my life that can. It is nothing. It is a hobby of a ruined woman. It signifies nothing to anyone but me." But even as she said it, out at the corner of the terrace, where the light from the card-room windows fell yellow across the flags, she saw the pale gleam of Julian Vane's coat and the still turn of his golden head, and understood with a cold lurch that he had been standing there long enough to hear the words "old course of the Ravensbourne" fall from her mouth into the dark, and that his beautiful, patient, hungry face had gone, for the first time all evening, entirely serious. The Duke followed the line of her gaze to the corner of the terrace, and Rowena felt him understand, in the space of a breath, exactly what she already knew, that they had been overheard, and by the one man in the county who could least be spared the hearing of it. Julian Vane came off the shadow of the wall and into the yellow fall of the card-room light, with his glass held loose in 2 fingers, and his golden head tipped, as though he were only strolling out to admire the stars. "Forgive me. I came for the air and found the 2 of you at a lovers' conference, which is a great deal more diverting than the whist." He propped one elbow on the warm balustrade and looked out at the dark park, at the invisible ribbon of the water below. "You were speaking of the river, I think. The Ravensbourne. I have always found it a melancholy thing, a straightened river. All that meddling, and for what? A few dry acres and a mill that grinds 9 months in the 12. My uncle had a great passion for improvement." He turned his beautiful, cold smile on the Duke. "It cost him, in the end. It cost us all a good deal, one way and another. Julian," the single word came out of the Duke flat as a shut drawer, "you are 3 years absent, and you choose tonight to return." "I choose the night of your betrothal, cousin. Naturally. What kind of kinsman would let such a thing pass unmarked?" He raised the glass a hair, a toast to nobody. The candle glow slid along the pearl buttons of his coat and left his eyes in shadow. "You are to be congratulated. She is charming. She reads maps." His gaze came to Rowena, and under its idle glitter she felt the whole weight of his attention settle, patient as a spider testing a thread. "Do you know, Miss Clark, I believe you and I shall have a great deal to say to one another before this summer is out. Old rivers. Old boundaries. Old wrongs that a clever pencil might set right, or set very wrong indeed, depending on whose pencil it is." He straightened, and the moths blundered around the lamp above him, and the smell of crushed stalks came up thick from the border below. "But not tonight. Tonight you must dance, and I must lose at cards to the squire, who cheats. Good night, cousin, Miss Clark, sleep well." He went, unhurried, his heels ringing on the flags, and the dark seemed to close behind him like water over a dropped stone. "He knows something," Rowena said. Her mouth had gone dry despite the punch. "About the river. He looked at me, and he said boundaries as though he were laying down a card he had held all evening." The Duke's hand had closed hard on the balustrade again. Julian knows the price of everything in this county to the shilling. Whatever he wants of the river, he will not have it. But the certainty in his voice was a thing built over a hollow, and she heard the hollow, the way she had heard the crack in him in the library 4 days before. "Go up, Miss Clark. It is late, and you have performed enough for one night." He did not look at her. "You performed very well." She went up. But she stood a long while at her open casement in the amber gown, listening to the fiddles fray away one by one and the carriages grind off into the warm dark, and she thought about boundaries, and about a golden man who had said old wrongs as though he could taste them. And sleep, when it came at last, was thin and full of the sound of water running where no water was. She was in the muniment room by 8. It was a cramped stone closet off the estate office, north-facing and cool even in July, smelling of iron and mildew, and the particular dust of old vellum. And Pruitt let her in with no more than a lift of one white eyebrow, and the observation that her Grace did not take her chocolate before 11, and a young woman might do a deal of harm to herself between 8 and 11, if she had a mind to. "I have a mind to," said Rowena. "Where are the estate maps, Pruitt? The old ones?" Before the river was straightened. The butler stood a moment in the doorway, walnut dark against the brighter office beyond, his hands folded. "That would be the difficulty, miss. There are no old ones. Not since his late Grace had the survey redrawn, 19 years gone, when the new channel was cut. The old plans were called in to the maker in London to be brought up to date, and there was a fire at the man's premises that winter, and they were never seen again." He said it without inflection, but his eyes rested on her a moment longer than the words required. His Grace's father grieved it. He said a man ought to be able to prove the ground he stands on. It was after that he took to marking the atlases in his own hand, in the library, a poor substitute he called it, but his own. Here the river ran. Rowena felt the pencil line under her thumb again, the 3 careful words. "So there is no record," she said slowly, "of where the boundary lay before the river was moved. Only the new survey, which shows it where the new channel runs. Only the new survey, miss, a pause, dry as the vellum. And whatever a clever person might reconstruct with a compass, and 3 weeks' patience, taking bearings from a pack-horse bridge before the light is up." She looked at him sharply. His face gave her nothing at all. 40 years of giving nothing, wearing it smooth as a river stone. "Pruitt, what runs along the old course? Whose land, if the river had never been touched?" "The mill, miss," said Pruitt. "The mill, and the whole of the Southwater meadow, some 50 acres of the best grazing on the estate, and the tenant farms that draw from the Leat. By the new channel they lie, within the entail, safe as the house itself. By the old course, he inclined his head the precise half-inch of his master, and his mistress before him. By the old course, miss, they would lie a good half-mile the wrong side of the boundary. On the portion that came, when it was portioned, to the cadet branch. To Mr. Vane, the cool room went cooler. Somewhere out in the office a clock ticked, and a fly turned slow circles against the barred window, and Rowena understood, with the cold, clear lurch that had governed the whole of her 26 years, precisely what she had spent 3 weeks innocently drawing. "He cannot claim it," she said, "without proof of where the river ran." "No, miss, and there is no proof. It was lost in a fire 19 years ago." "There was no proof, miss," Pruitt agreed, and let the small terrible word there hang in the mildewed air between them until she had heard every corner of it. "Her Grace bade me give you the run of these rooms whenever you asked." "I begin to think," he said, folding his hands, "that Her Grace, as is her custom, saw further than the rest of us. Shall I have coffee sent in? You have gone the colour of that vellum, and I find bad news sits easier on a full cup." She did not answer him. She was looking at the map case leaning in the corner where she had set it down, her father's case, the last unentailed thing, with 3 weeks of patient illicit bearings rolled up inside it, and thinking that she had come into this house with nothing to sell, and had, without once meaning to, drawn the one document in England that could put the Duke of Ravensmere in Chancery, and turn Julian Vane from a squandered younger son into the master of the mill, the meadow, and the tenant's bread. Julian found her before she found him, which she supposed afterward she should have expected of a man who had spent his life waiting in corners. She had taken the map case up to the long gallery to be alone with it. The gallery ran the whole north front, cool and dim, hung with the ranked portraits of Ravensmere dead she would not name to herself as such. The floorboards silver with old wax, and the tall windows showing the park baking white beyond. She had unrolled the survey across a marble side table and was bent over it with her father's brass compass in her hand, when Julian's voice came down the length of the room like a stone skipped over still water. There she is. The clever pencil herself. She did not startle. She had learned young not to give a watching man that gift. She rolled the survey shut with unhurried hands and turned, and he was already halfway down the gallery, hatless, immaculate in dove grey, smiling under the flat gaze of his own ancestors. Mr. Vane, the gallery is not, I think, on the way to anywhere. Nothing worth reaching ever is. He stopped an arm's length off and looked, frankly and without shame, at the case under her hand. You have been to the muniment room. Pruitt told me, no, that is unkind to Pruitt, who would sooner part with his tongue than his discretion. I guessed. You have the look of a woman who has just learned what she is holding. His voice dropped into something almost gentle, almost kind, which was the most dangerous register he had. It is a heavy thing to learn alone. Let me lighten it. Shall I tell you what that map is worth? I imagine you are going to. To my cousin, it is worth nothing but trouble, a boundary he would far rather stayed lost, an old fraud of his sainted fathers dragged into the light of the assize. To me, he spread his beautiful hands, it is worth an estate. And to you, Miss Clark, penniless companion, the last of a ruined line. Not worth the postage, as I hear you told him so charmingly last night. The words landed like a slap, and she saw him watch to see if they had. To you it might be worth a very great deal indeed. £2,000. In your hand, in banknotes, and a character written by my own hand to any house in England, and never again in your life the smell of another woman's chocolate going cold at your elbow, he smiled. I ask only for the survey, and for your silence as to how it came to me. You need not even lift the pen against him yourself. You need only look the other way, which I am told is the one thing you cannot do. For a moment, one honest moment she would examine coldly afterward and not much like. She felt the pull of it. £2,000 was a house of her own, and a fire of her own, and no old lady's bell for the rest of her days. It was the end of holding shawls and being spoken past. It was freedom, laid out on green baize. You have misjudged your price, she said. His smile widened. Everyone has a price, Miss Clark. I have never once been wrong about that. You have not misjudged that I have one. You have misjudged what it is. She lifted her chin. Get out of the gallery, Mr. Vane, and understand that I have now heard you offer money for a fraud against your cousin, which is a thing I shall remember. In every particular. In my own clever pencil, should I ever have need of it. The kindness went out of his face like a candle pinched between finger and thumb, and what was underneath was patient, and hungry, and entirely unhurried. You think you have chosen him, he said softly. You have not. You have chosen a summer's theatre with an ending already written. Oh yes, Miss Clark, I stood on the terrace long enough to hear that too. An arrangement, a performance, 8 weeks. And then you go quietly north. He tilted his golden head. How do you suppose my cousin will feel, I wonder, when he learns that the woman who wept so prettily over his father's grief at the Packhorse Bridge has been secretly surveying his boundaries for 3 weeks, and that she took £2,000 of vain money to do it? A performance, you called it. I do so agree. The only question left is which of us writes the ending. He bowed, the insolent half-inch too deep. Sleep well, cousin, you do it so badly. She got through 2 more days on nerve alone, and they were, God help her, the best 2 days she had spent under that roof. Because the Duke, all unknowing, chose them to begin trusting her. He came to the muniment room on the 2nd morning, and found her among the vellum, and stood in the doorway a while without speaking, and then said, gruffly, that if she meant to reconstruct the old course she had better do it properly, with the tithe records and the leet accounts, and not from a bridge in her nightgown catching her death of cold, and she said it had been a perfectly respectable police, and he said that was not the part that concerned him, and stopped and coloured, and they both pretended he had not. They worked. He hauled down the ledgers and read out the water rents in his even voice while she plotted the leet, and the cool room filled with the scratch of her pencil and the turn of his pages, and the green summer light striped through the barred window, and twice he leaned over her shoulder to see, and she felt the warmth of him along her whole side like a bank of banked coals, and neither of them moved away as quickly as the work required. "There," she said, on the second afternoon, sitting back, the old course, where your father's hand said it ran. She had inked it at last, the true curve, sweeping east and south of the mill in one long, confident stroke. "You see how it lies?" He bent close. His breath stirred the loose hair at her temple. "It curves east," he said slowly. "East of the mill. East of the mill. And of the meadow. And of every tenant farm on the leet." She looked up at him, and he was already looking down at her, and they were very close, and the compass was warm in her hand. "Do you understand what that means, Your Grace? That the mill was always ours," he said very low. "That whatever the boundary was called, the old river ran east of it, and the land inside the bend was Ravensmere land before my father ever touched a spade to it. He straightened nothing that was not his to straighten." Something moved in the flat grey eyes. Something that had been walled up for 3 years and was finding, all at once, a chink of light. "They said in the county he had cheated the cadet branch. Cousin Julian has said it, in every drawing room from here to Bath. And my father let them say it, because he had lost the proof in a fire, and would not defend himself on his bare word." His voice roughened. "You have given him back his name, Miss Clark. With a brass compass and 3 weeks' patience, you have given a man back his good name 3 years after." He stopped. He was too close, and she had turned her face up, and the July heat pressed at the window, and the whole cool room had gone somehow breathless, and his gaze dropped to her mouth and hung there, and she felt her own hand rise, entirely without her leave, to the lapel of his coat. "You are staring, Your Grace," she whispered. "It will give the wrong impression." "I am past caring," he said, "what impression it gives." And he was going to do it. She saw it come into him, like the tide, and she wanted it with a suddenness that frightened her far worse than Julian ever had. The muniment room door opened without a knock. "Well," said Julian Vane, from the threshold, with the whole warm ruin of his charm turned up to its brightest. "How very industrious. And here I came only to make my farewells, and find you both hard at work on the very thing I most wished to discuss." He had a paper in his hand. He had, she saw with the plunging cold of a body going off a parapet, a folded banker's draft in his hand, and he was holding it up to the light so that the Duke could not fail to see the sum inked across its face. £2,000. Cousin, drawn to Miss Clark, 3 days ago. By me. She has not cashed it, I will grant her that much cleverness. She waited to see which of us paid better. But she took it, and she said not one word to you of the taking, and she has been drawing your boundaries ever since. His eyes glittered. Do ask her. She does not lie well when a thing is put to her plainly. It is her one flaw. The Duke went very still. She felt the stillness come off him the way she had felt the heat come off him at the dinner table, and it was so much worse. Rowena, he said. Just that. Her name, that he had never once used, come out of him now like something torn. He offered it, she said. Her voice was steady, she made it steady. In the gallery, 2 days ago. He offered me £2,000 and a character to give him the survey and hold my tongue, and I refused him, and I told him to get out, and I told him I should remember every particular of it. Your Grace, look at me. I refused him. You said not one word of it to me. The marble had come back over his face, feature by feature. 3 years of it, closing like a lid. 2 days. We have sat in this room 2 days, and you knew my cousin meant to take the mill and the meadow and the bread out of my tenants' mouths with a map you had drawn, and you said, nothing. He stepped back from her. and the space where his warmth had been went cold in an instant. You told me your map signified nothing to anyone but you. You said that to me. On the terrace. After I gave you my father's name. I did not yet know what it signified. I learnt it only the morning after, from Pruitt, and then Julian was already on me, and I was going to tell you today. The moment the old course was inked, and I could prove which way it ran, so that I might bring you the whole of it, and not the half. How convenient, said Julian gently, that the telling was always to be tomorrow. Be quiet. The Duke did not raise his voice. He did not need to. She had learned that of him the first hour, in this very house. He was looking at her, only at her, and there was no anger in it, which was the unbearable part. There was only a man watching a snare close over the one thing he had let himself believe was not a snare. I do not know which of you to believe, he said, and that is the whole of it, do you see? 4 days ago I trusted no one in this house, and I slept sound. You made me want to. Both of you have made a study of what I want. He turned for the door. Keep the draft, Miss Clark, or burn it. It is nothing to me now. The engagement stands until my grandmother's guests are gone, because I will not make her a spectacle. After that you will go north, as you were always going to, with your character and your quarter's wage, exactly as you proposed to me in the library, an ending already written. You said those were the only kind you trusted. His hand was on the door. You were right. I should have listened. He went. Julian, in the doorway, watched him the length of the gallery, and then turned back to her with the draft still held to the light and the loveliest, coldest smile she had ever seen worn by a human face. You should have taken the money, he said. It was the same ruin either way, and at least you would have had the 2,000. He set the draft down on the marble beside her inked survey, gentle as a man laying a card face up on green baize. Do keep it. Consider it a wedding gift, for the wedding that will not now happen. I shall have the mill by Michaelmas, and my cousin's name back in the mud where it does me the most good. And you. He took up his hat. You will have a map no one will believe. Drawn by a woman no one will trust, proving a thing the only man who mattered has stopped his ears against. Good afternoon, Miss Clark. Then, he too was gone, and the muniment room door stood open on the silver length of the empty gallery, and Rowena Clark sat alone among the mildew and the iron and the barred green light, with her father's compass cold in one hand and, spread beneath the other, the finished map, the true east curve of the Ravensbourne, inked at last, sweeping clean and confident round the mill in a dead man's careful hand made visible. Here the river ran. She looked at it a long time, and slowly, through the roaring cold of it, one thought surfaced, and would not sink again, that the map on the table was not the weapon that had ruined her. It was the only weapon in England that could unmake Julian Vane, proof, in her own hand, corroborated in the late Duke's, that the cadet branch had no claim and never had, and that Julian, who had just held it up to the light and called it worthless, was far too clever a man to have failed to see that too. Which meant he had not come to buy her silence. He had come to make certain the one person who could read this map would never again be believed by the one person who needed to. He had not wanted the survey. He had wanted it burned, and her with it. Rowena stood. She rolled the survey tight and slid it into her father's case and set the brass catch, and out beyond the barred window the scythes hissed through the long gold grass of the south lawn, and somewhere far off a horse was being brought round hard, and she thought, he is leaving for London, and he will not go empty-handed. She caught up her skirts and went out at a run down the silver gallery, past the ranked and watching portraits, toward the sound of hooves on the gravel, because Julian Vane never rode out for nothing, and there was only one thing left in this house worth his riding for. And it was not the woman he had just thrown to the wolves. It was the old woman who had drawn all of them onto the board in the first place, and who did not yet know that her last best move had just been turned, in the space of one afternoon, into a knife pointed straight at her own throat. The gravel blazed white under the noon sun, and the horse being walked in slow circles before the steps was Julian's, a raking chestnut, with a London saddle, and a groom at its head, who would not lift his eyes to hers. Rowena came out through the great doors into the wall of heat, with her father's case gripped crosswise to her chest, and the sweat already starting cold along her spine. Pruitt. He was there. Of course he was there. Upright in the shade of the portico, as though he had grown out of the stone. Where is he? Where is Mr. Vane? Within, miss, the walnut voice gave nothing. But his eyes moved, once toward the east front, and that was as good as a shout from another man. He has asked to wait upon her grace before he takes the road. She received him not 5 minutes since. In the yellow saloon, where the chocolate went cold and the fan worked, and the old woman who could not be kept sat among her open windows with 2 summers in her, believing she had won. Rowena's heart turned right over. He means to tell her, she said. He means to tell her the whole of it, the bargain, the money, the ending already written. He means to break her with it, Pruitt. And she is not. She is not strong enough to be, no, said Pruitt. And then, dry as the vellum in his cold north room, laying the small word down like a card face up, or perhaps, miss. Her grace is a great deal stronger than the gentleman supposes. She generally is. Shall I announce you? Do not announce me. She was already moving, skirts caught up in one fist, the case banging her hip. Announce nothing, only pray, if you have kept any prayers in 40 years, that I am not too late for once in my life. She went through the cool marble hall at a run that no companion in England had any business at, past the ranked footman who stared and did not move, and the day heat came at her through every open door in gusts of hot lime and cut grass and beeswax, and the fiddle's ghost still hummed in the empty ballroom as she passed it, and her slippers found the yellow saloon's threshold and stopped there, chest-heaving, exactly as the Duke of Ravensmere came in through the garden door at the far end, with the light behind him, and murder in his still grey face. They had both of them run. Neither had known the other would. Between them, enthroned in dove-grey silk amid her archipelago of windows, the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere sat with her Chinese fan folded shut in her lap, and her winter eyes bright as a bird's, and before her, one elbow propped with insolent ease upon the japanned table, stood Julian Vane, golden and immaculate and smiling, in the very act of drawing breath to ruin her. "Ah," said the Dowager, into the sudden crowded silence. "Good, you are all come. I did so hope you would. Julian was about to tell me something scandalous, weren't you, my dear? Pray do go on. You had reached the interesting part." Julian's smile did not waver, but his eyes moved once around the room and counted the odds, and Rowena saw him decide, in the cool, practiced way of a man who has never yet been caught without a card, to play it faster. "I had reached the truth, grandmother," he said, "which I know you value above comfort. Your grandson is not engaged, not in any sense you would own. He and this young person struck a bargain in the library 4 nights ago, in plain words, with an ending already written, a summer's theatre, a courtship played out before your guests to spare your feelings, and then a mutual regret when the leaves turn, and Miss Clark sent quietly north with her wage and her character, and my cousin restored to his blessed solitude." He spread one beautiful hand toward Rowena without looking at her. "I stood upon the terrace. I heard every syllable. You have been managed, madam, gulled in your own drawing-room by the 2 people you trust. I thought, kinsman that I am, that you had a right to know it before you spent yourself into the grave upon a wedding that was never coming. It was cruel, and it was clean, and it was aimed to go straight through the old ribs into the tired heart beneath them." Rowena took 1 step into the room. "Your Grace, it is not." He twists it. It began as, "Be still, child." The Dowager did not raise her voice. She lifted the folded fan an inch and set it down, and looked at Julian Vane with an expression Rowena had last seen on her at the dinner table, moving her guns in the dark. "You heard them in the library. Every word." "Yes," said the Dowager Duchess. "So did I." The room went very quiet. Out through the windows the scythes hissed once, and stopped, and a wasp, or its cousin, knocked twice at the glass and was still. I paused in the corridor on my way up to bed, she went on, mild as milk, as old women do, being slow upon the stair, and I heard my grandson say he had not done this. And I heard this clever girl offer him a way out that cost him nothing, and me my whim. And I heard him take her hand and hold it a great deal longer than any bargain required. I went up smiling, Julian. I have been smiling for 4 days. She turned the fan over. You have ridden a hard chestnut half across the county to bring me, as your great blow, a thing I knew before you had your boots off. Did you truly imagine, boy, that I arrange 3 marriages a season and do not know when my own is taking? I did not want them betrothed. I wanted them acquainted. The betrothal was only the wall I built to keep them in one room long enough to look at each other. And look at each other they have. Her eyes glittered. You have brought me no knife at all. You have brought me the handle, and cut yourself upon the way. Julian's charm held. She would give him that. Afterward, coldly, it held 1 moment longer than any other man's would have. Then it thinned, at the edges, the way ice thins over a running stream. How very touching, he said. It changes nothing that signifies. Believe what you like of their hearts, madam. Hearts are cheap this weather. The mill is not. He straightened off the table. I did not come only to gossip. I came to give my cousin notice, before witnesses, since he is so fond of witnesses of late, that I mean to lay claim in chancery to the mill, the South Water meadow, and the tenant farms upon the Leat, all of which, by the boundary as it now stands, lie a half-mile within the entail, and all of which, by the true old course of the Ravensbourne, that your husband so conveniently straightened 19 years gone, lie upon the cadet portion. My portion. He cheated my branch of 50 acres, and a mill, with a spade and a fire, and let the county think what it liked of him, rather than answer it, and I have waited a long, patient while for the proof to be lost past all hope of raising. He smiled, and it was ghastly now, all teeth and no warmth left in it at all. And now it is lost. There is no old survey. There is no plan. There is nothing but one dead man's word, which he never spoke, and one ruined girl's pencil, which no court and no cousin will ever now believe. You have seen to that yourself, cousin. You called her a liar in the muniment room not an hour ago. I heard you do it. I did. The Duke's voice came from the garden door, low and even and terrible. He crossed the carpet slowly, the lights sliding off the black and silver he had worn to dance in and had not yet changed, and he stopped between Julian and Rowena as a man stops between a thrown stone and a window. I called her a liar. It was the greatest folly of a life that has not been short of folly, and I have been standing in the stable yard for the last half hour learning it, because Pruitt, who has not exaggerated a thing in 40 years, put it to me plainly what my cousin is, and always was, and what this house looks like from the outside to a man who has walled himself up inside it. He did not turn to her. But his shoulders had changed. Say the rest of it, Rowena. You have the case in your hands. You have had the answer in your hands these 2 days, and I would not hear it. Say it now, before them both. She could scarcely breathe, but she had learned in that house that the way through a locked room is a straight spine and a straighter tongue, and she set her father's case down upon the japanned table beside the cold chocolate, and worked the brass catch with fingers that shook only a little. There is no old survey, she said. That is true. It burned 19 years ago at the maker's premises in London. Pruitt showed me the record this morning. Your father grieved it. He said a man ought to be able to prove the ground he stands on. She drew out the roll and let it fall open across the table, waiting one curling edge with the dowager's own fan, and there it lay in the hot east light, the Leat inked fine as a hair, the mill squared black, the tenant farms lettered small, and sweeping round the whole of it in one long confident stroke, east and south of the mill and the meadow both, the true curve of a river that no longer ran there. So I made another. From the fall of the land, and the tithe records, and the Leat accounts your cousin never thought to burn, and 3 weeks of bearings taken from the Packhorse Bridge before the light was up, and it says, it proves, in a form any surveyor in England will stand up in court and swear to, that the old Ravensbourne ran east of the mill, that the land inside the bend was Ravensmere land before your father ever set a spade to it. He straightened nothing that was not his. He cheated no one. The 50 acres were never the cadet branch's to lose. A pretty forgery, said Julian, but something had gone out of his voice. It is not forgery, and you know it is not, for you are far too clever to have failed to read it when you held it to the light in the gallery yesterday and called it worthless. She turned on him, and her fear had burned clean away and left something harder in its place. You never wanted this map, Mr. Vane. You wanted it gone. You offered me £2,000 not to keep me quiet. My silence was worth nothing. I am a nobody. You said so yourself. But to have the survey in your own hands to burn, and me discredited past all believing, so that when the mill came to Chancery there should be no plan, and no witness, and no one on earth left able to prove which way the water ran. You came to make certain the one person who could read this map would never again be believed by the one man who needed to. She reached into the case a second time and brought out the folded banker's draft and laid it down flat upon the marble beside the map, uncreased, its ink unbroken, the sum blazing across its face. There is your £2,000, uncashed. I never touched a farthing of it, and His Grace himself watched you lay it before me not an hour since, and I have every word of your gallery offer set down in my own clever pencil, as I promised you I should. So, you have a claim with no proof, cousin, and a bribe with no taker, and a slander that the whole of this room has just watched come apart in your hands. She lifted her chin. Which of us, do you suppose, writes the ending now? For a long moment, Julian Vane looked at the map on the table, and the draft beside it, and the three faces ranged against him in the hot, bright room, and Rowena watched the calculation run behind his beautiful eyes and come, at last, to nothing. There was no card left. He had laid them all. You would truly do this, he said, and for the first time all summer there was neither charm in it nor cruelty, only a kind of hollow wonder. You would beggar me for 50 acres and a mill. I would keep a man his good name 3 years after he was too proud to keep it himself, said the Duke of Ravensmere. You beggared yourself, Julian, at 24, and have spent the years since blaming the ground for the fall. The mill is not yours. It never was. Take the road you came by. There is a paper on the table by the door. My man of business drew it while I stood in the yard. A quittance, in which you renounce all claim upon the entail in exchange for the settling of your London debts one final time, which is a great deal more than justice, and a great deal more than you would get from any court once that map is entered. Sign it, or do not, and go to Chancery, and be broken there in public with the whole county watching, which will suit me nearly as well. He held his cousin's eyes without heat. I am done being afraid of you. It is a remarkably light thing to set down, once a person decides to. Julian looked at the quittance. He looked at the map. And then, because he was, to the last, a man who caught things before they fell, he crossed to the side table and took up the pen and signed his name to the paper with a flourish, and set it down, and turned in the doorway with the ruin of his smile put back on crooked over the wreck of his afternoon. You will bore each other insensible by Lady Day, he said. Two people who tell the truth. There is nothing in the world so tedious. He bowed, the insolent half-inch, to the old woman who had beaten him. Grandmother, my compliments on the ball. The candles, at least, were beyond reproach. Then he was gone, and his heels rang away down the marble, and out on the blazing gravel the raking chestnut was mounted and turned, and put at the avenue at a hard gallop that flung the white stones wide, and the sound of him thinned and dwindled and was swallowed at last by the green weight of the July limes, and the room let out a breath it had been holding for 19 years. The Dowager Duchess reached out one beringed hand, and drew the map toward her across the table, and looked down a long while at the fine dark curve of a river that had run there before she was a bride in this house. Here the river ran, she read softly, tracing the late Duke's careful hand in the margin with one finger. He wrote that in 100 atlases, and never once let himself weep over it in front of me. Stubborn to the bone, the whole line of them. She looked up, and her winter eyes were bright and not entirely dry, and she fixed them upon her grandson. Well, you have your name back, and your mill, and your 50 acres, and this remarkable girl has handed them to you with a brass compass, and no thought at all for what it would cost her when you turned on her for it. Which you did, at the first pretty lie your cousin told, you graceless boy. I am going to my room. I find I am 70 after all this afternoon, and I have been proved right, which is exhausting at any age. She rose, waving off the hand Rowena put out. You two will settle the rest of it without me. You have both had a great deal of practice at conversations you were not meant to be overheard at. Pray have this one where the corridor cannot hear. She went, upright as a fire iron, and the door closed behind her with a soft, expensive click. And Rowena Clark and the Duke of Ravensmere were left alone in the yellow saloon with the cold chocolate and the working heat and the map of a vanished river open on the table between them. For a moment, neither of them moved. Out through the windows a wood pigeon began its slow 5 notes over and over in the limes, and the smell of cut grass came up thick and sweet from the south lawn, where the scythes had gone back to work, and the light lay in long yellow bars across the carpet. I called you a liar, the Duke said at last. He was standing very straight, and it plainly cost him. In my father's own muniment room, over my father's own name that you had spent 3 weeks giving back to him. I had it before me, the map, the draft you never cashed, 2 days of you working at my shoulder in that cold room asking nothing, and I chose to believe the one thing that let me go back to trusting no one, because trusting no one is a house I know the shape of in the dark. His jaw worked. It is easier. That is the whole shabby truth of it. Grief and duty wear a similar coat, my grandmother says, and I have worn both these 3 years because they asked nothing of me but that I keep still and keep count. And then you rolled out of that alcove on an unbraked ladder into the full glare of the window and told me I had excellent lungs, and I have not kept still an hour since. You need not, she began. I need to. Let me. I am very bad at it and I shall not get through it twice. He came round the table, past the map, and stopped an arm's length off, and made himself look at her. I have squared every paper in this house corner to corner for 3 years, so that I need not feel how crooked the rest of it was. You saw me at the bridge, the one morning I let a single thing off its lead, and you told no one, and spent no coin you might have spent, because you said a man is owed his grief unwatched. No one in my life has ever handed me back a thing they might have used against me. My cousin has spent 30 years teaching me that no one ever would. His voice roughened and dropped, and I paid you for it by calling you a fraud across my father's ledgers. There is your cost, Rowena, if you want one named. I have spent the coin of my own good conduct, the one thing I was proud of, and found it counterfeit, and I would rather stand here and know myself a fool who wronged you than go back to being the ordered, careful, solitary man who never did. Because that man was never once happy, and had made a virtue of not noticing. Rowena's throat had closed. It was a bargain, she said, unsteadily, an arrangement. A performance, with an ending already written. You said those were the only kind you trusted. So did I. We are 2 people who trust endings we have written ourselves. Because we neither of us have ever once been given a good one we did not draw with our own hand. I know it. He was near enough now that she could see the pulse in his throat, the damp still at the dark hair by his temple, the grey eyes gone wide open the way they had at the bridge, all the marble down. I do not want the ending we wrote. I have been standing in a stable yard this half hour tearing it up. I do not want you sent north with your wage and your character to be some other old woman's clever tongue. I want. He stopped, and she watched a man who ordered everything reach for a word he could not put in a row, and find it anyway. I want you to stay, and quarrel with me about drainage, until we are both as old and impossible as my grandmother, and I want you to draw every vanished river in the county, and hang the maps in the long gallery where posterity may see them, and I want the whole of it real, with no ending written, and no cost hidden, because I am in love with you, Rowena Clark, which I have known since you gave me back the sight of myself at that bridge, and would not spend it, and which I was too great a coward to say until my cousin very nearly took you off me for good. The wood pigeons stopped. The whole hot afternoon seemed to hang still on the bar of light between them. "You made a joke at the ball," Rowena said, absurdly, her eyes stinging. "Benediction and toothache. I said I should have it engraved." "I have been saving another," he said. "I have been practicing." "Do not you dare, Miss Clark," said the Duke of Ravensmere gravely. "I find, upon reflection, that I would sooner be flayed than not marry you. Not if the alternative were a debtor's cell. Not if my grandmother wept for a full 12-month and the west roof came down on both our heads." His mouth curved, at last, the whole way, into the smile she had spent a summer aiming for and hitting only glancingly. "I understand the man who said the opposite in this house 4 days ago was a great fool with excellent lungs. I have it on the best authority. She was up a ladder at the time." And Rowena Clark, who had come into that house with nothing to sell and had drawn, without once meaning to, the one map that could unmake a villain and mend a name and undo herself entirely, put both her hands flat against the black and silver lapels she had touched once in the muniment room and not been permitted to finish touching, and laughed and wept, both at once, which was a thing she had not done since she was 17 and stupid, and believed the world owed her a good end. "I am not the material for a duchess," she said into his coat. "We both know it. Your grandmother knows it. The whole county, he said, against her hair, his arms coming round her sure and warm as a bank of banked coals, may take its opinions on my duchess to church on Sunday and hear them corrected. I have a very carrying voice. I am told half of Cornwall." And then he stopped talking, because she had lifted her face, and he bent his dark head to hers, at last in the yellow light, with the map of a vanished river open beside them, and the limes breathing through every window, and the ending neither of them had written arrived, unlooked for and unhurried, and entirely their own. They were married when the leaves turned. Not at the great ball's height, with 60 candles and the county measuring the silk, but quietly, in the grey church at the park's edge, on a still gold morning in the first week of October, with the hedgerows gone to hip and haw, and the mist standing white in the water meadow that had so nearly been lost, and the Dowager Duchess of Ravensmere upright in the front pew in dove grey, weeping without the smallest shame and denying it flatly to anyone who dared to notice. Pruitt gave the responses from the back, with 40 years' gravity, and once, when the Duke fumbled the ring and recovered it, allowed himself the ghost of a smile that no one but Rowena caught. There was no ball afterward. There was breakfast in the yellow saloon, with the windows open on the sharp, bright autumn, and the squire's deaf brother agreeing loudly with everything the bride said, and the dowager pronouncing the whole affair adequate, which from her was a coronation. And in the weeks that followed, the true old course of the Ravensbourne was entered at the assize under the seal of 2 sworn surveyors, and the late Duke's name came out of the mud where 19 years of silence had let it lie. And up and down the county the drawing-rooms that had shaken their heads over the improving Duke, who cheated his own blood, found they had always, of course, believed him honest. Julian Vane's debts were settled a final time, and Julian Vane was seen no more at Ravensmere, and if his name was spoken in that house it was without heat, the way one speaks of weather that has passed. Rowena found the Duke in the library on a bright cold afternoon in November, when the fires were lit against the first true chill, and the low sun came level through the tall south windows where a summer wasp had once knocked itself stupid against the glass. He was up the rolling ladder. She had had the little brass brake removed entirely. On principle, hanging the last of it, her map, framed in gilt, the fine dark curve of the vanished river sweeping east of the mill, and in the margin, matted beside her own inked survey, the small brown scrap of Atlas page in a dead and honoured man's careful hand. "You have set the brake," she called up, mock severe, one hand shading her eyes against the low gold light. "I am disappointed in you. All our best conversations began with an unbraked ladder. I have learned to leave the good ones off their lead," he said, and came down a rung, and looked at the map hung level at last upon the wall, where the whole ordered acreage of his life could see it. "There, my father's ground, proved, and hung where the county calls to congratulate me on my drains." He would have. He stopped. He let himself feel it, which he had learnt to do, in this room, with this woman, and no longer stepped around. He would have liked you enormously, and told you so exactly never, and marked your maps in the margins when he thought you were not looking. It runs in the line. She climbed 2 rungs to stand beside him on the wide old ladder, and the leather rail was warm under her palm, and below them the fire snapped, and the low sun laid its long bars across the turkey carpet, and outside the last leaves came down slow, and gold past the glass, where no wasp knocked now, the summer being well and truly over, and something better grown up in its place. He set his hand over hers on the warm rail, corner to corner, tidy as ever, and neither of them moved it away. Here the river ran, Rowena read softly, from the margin, in the dead Duke's hand. Here it runs still, said her husband, and kissed her, and the folio atlas that had started the whole affair sat forgotten on its high shelf under its soft grey pelt of dust, 10 feet above 2 people who had, against every ending either of them ever thought to write, come thoroughly and irretrievably home. If this one warmed you by the fire tonight, do stay a while, subscribe and light the lamp with us, and tell me in the comments which line made you smile, for I do read every one. Until the next story, sleep well.